The aftermath of the massacre at Ararat revealed a battlefield steeped in mystery. An archaeological dig was underway, supervised by Kandawire, a High Lord of Terra. Kandawire had chosen to travel incognito to the site, cloaking her movements from prying eyes within the Emperor's emerging bureaucracy. She sat stiffly during the turbulent flight, complaining of its discomfort. Sevu, her trusted military attaché, concealed his amusement. He knew that more advanced craft could eliminate turbulence entirely, but Kandawire had chosen discretion over luxury. Her retinue, clad in heavy chainmail, stood as a curious contrast to the sleek, brutal efficiency of their era. The impractical armor offered no real protection in a world where soldiers carried weapons capable of obliterating tank armor. Yet the chainmail conveyed a symbol of authority, albeit an outdated one. It reflected a deeper truth. Appearances of safety often mattered more than genuine security in the Emperor's nascent Imperium. Upon arriving at the excavation site, the chill of the air bit into servitors and humans alike. Even the mechanized constructs struggled with the cold, their servos grinding audibly. The dig revealed fragments of ancient armor scattered across the ground. Some appeared to be a ceramic with an otherworldly resistance to heat, while others glittered with traces of gold that defied analysis, frying the dig's most advanced scanners. These materials, ceramite and aramite, were beyond the comprehension of most humans at this time, hints of technologies as distant as they were powerful. Sevu showed Kandawire an artifact recovered from the rubble, a badge bearing the Raptor Imperialis. Kandawire regarded it with a mixture of resignation and vindication. She confided to Sevu that she had argued against the symbol, preferring an image of unity and creation over one of destruction. Yet, the councils she once sat upon had made their decision, embedding the Emperor's chosen iconography into the fabric of his rule. Her authority extended to these decisions, but even that power did not shield her from compromise. After inspecting the site and gathering the information she sought, Kandawire ordered the dig shut down. The researchers groaned in frustration as their work was dismantled. But Kandawire's objective had been achieved. The presence of the Custodians at Ararat was no longer speculation, it was fact. Far to the north, the Imperial Palace climbed skyward in its construction. Beneath its shadow, Simonas, a Custodian intelligence specialist, strode through the colossal corridors of the Emperor's vision. He moved with purpose, his thoughts as sharp as his gilded armor. The air was thin, even for one such as him, a being crafted to endure where ordinary mortals would falter. It had taken years to stabilize the climate here, and still the work was incomplete. Deep within the Himalayan mountains, nuclear power plants thrummed, providing the lifeblood for the fortress city. Simonas reflected on the ambition behind this effort. Not merely a citadel, but a statement. Once complete, he thought, this fortress will daunt the mortal soul. It will project such dominance that no enemy will dare assault it unless driven mad beyond reason. His path led him to a meeting with Valdor, the Captain General of the Custodians, who had been summoned back from battles in the west. Simonas' thoughts turned inward as he walked. The Emperor, for all his unmatched might, faced limits. He required tools, allies, and servants to realize his vision. Among them, Valdor was the sharpest, an instrument of perfect precision. Yet even tools of the Emperor's making carried burdens. Simonas wondered how much weight Valdor bore, returning now to the heart of the Imperium's burgeoning power. Within the confines of Valdor's chambers, Simonas stood at attention, his mind pondering the understated nature of the title Captain General. He found it refreshingly modest compared to the pomp of other Imperium ranks. Simonas detested what he called the Gothic inflation of titles, a symptom of the bloated scholar class rising within the Emperor's bureaucracy. The conversation between the two Custodians touched upon the Emperor's decision to place the Imperial Palace in the Himalayas. Both men called it ludicrous, a triumph of vision over practicality. Simonas, ever the pragmatist, wondered aloud if any Custodian could sustain a genuine disagreement with the Emperor. Valdor, with his characteristic calm, did not answer directly, as if the question itself bordered on heresy. Their dialogue shifted to the subject of Kandawire, the High Lord conducting her investigation into the Custodians. Simonas suggested a direct solution to the problem: end her. Valdor's reply was as measured as it was final. It is a new age, Simonas. I will not succumb to a warlord's urges. He instructed Simonas to maintain vigilance instead, watching for any sign of weakness or hesitation in her actions. Simonas hesitated but reminded Valdor of one critical fact. She has his trust. Valdor's response was solemn, his voice heavy with meaning. I do not think he trusts Simonas. Be mindful, the stronger you become, the weaker everything around you is. He can grasp onto nothing, for his grip will break it. Imagine that. Imagine the solitude of it. The Captain General went on to express reluctant admiration for Kandawire, calling her a symbol, a better kind than we are. Yet his resolve remained clear. If the moment came, Kandawire would not be spared. Beneath Valdor's cold pragmatism lay a man still devoted to the Emperor's original vision, a unified Imperium for baseline humanity, overseen by civilian governance. But even ideals could be sacrificed if they stood in the way of the Emperor's ultimate design. High Lord Kandawire's arrival at the Imperial Palace was an exercise in contradictions. The grand citadel, steeped in legend, seemed to her both awe-inspiring and impractical. She marveled at its defiance of time and nature, yet gave little thought to the cost of transporting resources to such an inhospitable location. Her privilege insulated her from such concerns. Her quarters, though assigned to a High Lord, were barely livable. The heat was unreliable, the water ice-cold and muddy. Emerging from her freezing shower, Kandawire's foul mood sent her servants scattering. Dressing in gaudy jewelry, she dismissed her aide's advice to show humility. The custodian she was about to meet could kill her with a flick of his fingers. But Kandawire insisted there is more than one kind of strength. As she made her way to the Tower of the Hegemon, Kandawire's thoughts turned to her past in the Banda Confederacy of Africa. Though her family was considered wealthy, they had only a tenuous grasp on stability. Food security was never guaranteed, and her estate's guards patrolled more to project an image of power than to enforce it. Kandawire was a spoiled child, disdainful of physical activity and enamored with small luxuries. She spent hours as a girl gazing at the desiccated ocean basin, using a broken lithcast projector to beam blurry maps onto the walls of her family home. She wondered if civilizations across the oceans were wise and cultured, or perhaps no better than the savage Zuipa, marauders who raided the lands with their flame-bringing trucks. This childhood curiosity, rooted in privilege and naivete, evolved into a dogged determination to understand the forces shaping her world. Yet, as Kandawire approached the custodian, she knew one thing for certain: no understanding would shield her from his judgment if she stepped out of line. Kandawire's worldview had been shaped by a single truth imparted by her father during her childhood. For things to work, the warrior must serve the worker. The worker makes things work. These words carried weight, born from a lifetime witnessing the decline of their coastal cities. Once vibrant, sustained by desalinization plants, they had crumbled under the chaos of unending warfare. The warrior class, left unchecked, had reduced a thriving civilization to ash. This lesson etched itself deeply into Kandawire's mind, especially after losing her parents to the instability of the pre-unification era. Her mother had succumbed to cancer, untreated because healthcare infrastructure was non-existent despite the existence of advanced technology. Her father was killed in a violent raid that forced her from their home. She fled, dragged to safety by a loyal servant, yet she reflected bitterly on her selfish demands at the time, insisting her broken lithcast projector be saved, while sparing no thought for the people left behind. These memories, framed by guilt and privilege, fueled Kandawire's unyielding belief in accountability and the necessity of civilian oversight. Yet even this conviction wavered as her aircraft touched down at the Tower of the Hegemon. She was greeted by the aristocratic tower serfs, their haughty demeanor igniting a fresh wave of distaste. As they escorted her to her meeting, the colossal chamber loomed above her, its sparse design dominated by arrow-slit windows. 2 chairs stood at the center, one modestly sized, the other massive. Sitting in the latter was Valdor, an embodiment of silent authority. He commanded her to sit, and she obeyed, almost involuntarily. Kandawire declared her purpose boldly, invoking the Lex Pacifica to place Valdor under a formal inquiry. Her voice was steady, but her body betrayed her. She sweated beneath the weight of transhuman dread, instincts screaming at her to flee or defend herself. Valdor, towering at 9 feet, loomed like a statue. His stillness was unnerving, his breath imperceptible. Kandawire's fear extended beyond his size. It stemmed from her understanding that she was interrogating one of the Imperium's most lethal instruments. Asking the wrong question might well seal her fate. Her modest chair felt like an afterthought next to his, an imposing throne carved with the precision of ancient mastery. She glanced at his massive frame, her thoughts momentarily drifting to her own relatively poor physical condition, a consequence of indulging in rich confections and avoiding physical exertion. The absurd disparity of their seats underscored her vulnerability, yet she refused to falter. The legends of the Egyptian pharaohs, ancient even in this distant age, seemed alive in the towering figure before her. For all her power as a High Lord, Kandawire understood that Valdor's strength, both physical and symbolic, belonged to an entirely different plane of existence. She was not here to challenge that power, but to uncover its truths. She drew a recording disc from her belongings, its polished surface catching the dim light. "This is about process," she began, her voice steady despite her unease. Valdor inclined his head slightly, a gesture of both acknowledgement and impatience. "Yes, that is what your staff told mine." She pressed on. "We live in perilous times. We cannot go back to the way things were." "Agreed on both counts," he replied, his tone neutral, yet carrying the weight of centuries of service. As the representative of civilian government, she continued, "the counterweight to military orders, it is imperative that things are not hidden. That all is made plain between us." Valdor's reply came without hesitation. "Madam High Lord, all of this has already been determined. We are short of time. As I say, what do you wish to know?" Her resolve wavered for the briefest of moments. The culmination of her investigation sat within reach. Yet now that she faced it, an inexplicable reluctance took hold. She forced herself to gesture to the disc, activating its soft standby glow. "I would like to begin with Maulland Sen," she said, her voice firming. "Maulland Sen," Valdor repeated. "That is not a name I recall with any fondness." Valdor's golden visage remained impassive as he began. "Maulland Sen," he said, the words weighted with distaste. "It was a confederacy of states, banded together during the worst years of anarchy. The climate in those latitudes is severe, punishing winters compounded by the destruction of weather satellites. Without them, humanity struggled to endure. Some form of association was necessary to stave off depopulation, as in many other regions where civilization had utterly collapsed." His tone shifted, taking on a darker edge. "It was not the first kingdom we conquered. Its distance from our centers of control made it an impractical target early on, but the Emperor marked it for attention. He knew it well. He had been there before." Kandawire leaned forward slightly. "By he, you mean?" "The Emperor," Valdor replied with an air of inevitability. He was fully aware of the practices conducted there and sought to eradicate them as soon as the means became available. Always remember, the objective was not merely territorial conquest, it was to cleanse Terra of sorcery. The very notion likely amuses you now, but during the anarchy, such beliefs festered unchecked. Moral corruption opened doors that should have remained sealed. Maulland Sen was a place where far too many doors had been left open. Kandawire's expression betrayed her skepticism, earning a rare moment of candor from Valdor. "You smile, High Lord, yet even your modern mind cannot dismiss what we encountered. As we advanced north, the conditions turned hellish. Howling winds, freezing machinery, men reduced to lighting fires beneath their transports just to make them usable. And then there were other things." Kandawire's voice held a hint of incredulity. "Other things?" "Yes," Valdor said, unflinching. "Voices in the wind, ghosts real enough to shatter the resolve of our unenhanced troops. Those who died returned to us, their forms flickering in the gales. It preyed on the minds of our line troopers, and it was no mere metaphor. Ghosts dogged us." Her fingers tightened around her recording device. "You mean that figuratively, I presume?" "No," he said plainly, his unwavering eyes meeting hers. "I use what I believe to be the proper term." He offered no further explanation, leaving her to wrestle with the implications. He continued with an almost clinical detachment. Maulland Sen was a kingdom of witches, a nightmare given form. There was no law, no science worthy of the name, only scraps of knowledge twisted to grotesque ends. Its military might was a veneer, strong in appearance but rotten at the core. The Emperor saw it for what it was. When others counseled caution, he ordered its destruction, and so it was destroyed. Valdor's tone shifted, growing more precise. This campaign was among the first to see the widespread deployment of the Thunder Warriors. The 4th Legion, the Iron Lords, were deployed en masse, their siegecraft honed through both training and genecraft. They impressed him with their preparation, even when other legions were far from battle-ready. The Iron Lords, Kandawire echoed, specialists in siegecraft, the name feels significant. A coincidence, Valdor replied, though his tone carried no conviction. Perhaps. Alongside the Thunder Warriors, 22 regiments of standard troops supported the campaign. The Imperial Army by then was organized into divisions specialized for climatic zones. Cold weather troops were critical for survival in that desolate place. A human exposed to the elements without technological aid or certain proscribed methods would die within hours. It was a hellish place, one that should never have sustained life, and yet when we arrived, we found our answer. The faintest pause preceded his final words. It was not life, it was corruption. Valdor's tone shifted as he continued, his words precise yet carrying an undercurrent of wariness. And then there was the Legio Custodes. 30 warriors accompanied me, their duties primarily protective. It was not anticipated that we would play the leading part in the fighting. Maulland Sen was, in many ways, a trial for the Thunder Warriors. We wished to see if they could be as lethal en masse as they had proven in smaller formations. The Thunder Warriors were commanded by a figure you might call a Primarch, though the term is not as you now understand it. Initially, fighting divisions were envisioned as smaller, regimented formations, and the rank of Primarch was their highest command. They were not physically distinct from their troops, though their leadership and combat acumen had been proven in the crucible of war. Ushotan, Primarch of the 4th Legion, was no exception. A superlative warrior and general, he had my respect in many ways. Kandawire leaned forward. And the Emperor? Did he choose Ushotan personally? He did, Valdor confirmed. The Primarchs were appointed directly by him, their equipment tailored to the finest technologies we could muster, though resources varied wildly. Some soldiers marched in fine armor, others in fatigues a generation old. Innovation was constant in those days. The Primarchs, naturally, received the best we had, but much was still crude compared to what you see now. Kandawire's recorder caught every word, yet her true question lingered unspoken. Tell me, what was it like to witness that campaign? Valdor's response came measured, stripped of emotion. I take no pleasure, nor do I feel dismay in combat. That was not true for our enemies or for Ushotan's warriors. The Priest King, as our enemy styled himself, commanded fanatical forces. They were deranged by combat narcotics and delusions he fed them. Somehow, even in that frozen wasteland, they had recovered fragments of technology from the Forgotten Age and twisted it to their purposes. He paused, his gaze momentarily distant. We fought men stitched into mockeries of the human form, encased in machines and driven by pain amplifiers. Many had been warped into grotesque shapes, their dignity traded for feral strength. It was despicable, and yet, despite the horror they embodied, we would not have conquered them or Terra without Thunder Warriors. Valdor's voice hardened. Even now, some doubt it. Terra could not have been unified without them. They were the weapons that allowed us to advance into that ice-locked night. The monsters we fought required monsters to overcome them. Kandawire asked no follow-up, allowing the Custodian to continue. The conditions were hellish. Ice storms howled every day. Transport engines froze solid, and equipment often failed. The armor and weapons we carried were crude compared to what we wield now. Steel plate and hardened leather were replaced in later years by ceramic and alloy. Progress came, but not in time for Maulland Sen. Her tone grew sharper. I do not need to know about your equipment, Valdor. What did it feel like to be there? His expression remained stoic, but there was a slight hesitation before he spoke. I will do my best to explain. There was a sickness. We could all taste it. I have encountered similar sensations since when fighting other enemies of allied origin. Then, it was new to me and my brothers. It disgusted us. And the Thunder Warriors? Kandawire pressed. They thrived on it, Valdor said, at least for a time. They could magnify whatever foulness they faced. That ferocity was a strength, but it had its cost. The stronghold we faced was a fortress, its black walls gleaming under a sickly green light. There was an art to its construction, but one twisted toward pain. Its fortifications, prepared over years, were immense. I remember standing before it on the final night, looking up at that obscene edifice and knowing what it would take to destroy it. He fell silent, as if the memory alone weighed heavily. Valdor's voice grew distant as he recounted the final assault. It might have been wiser to slow the pace, to limit our casualties, but by then, the Thunder Warriors were caught in a cycle of aggression. Death meant nothing to them, and for a time it seemed orders meant nothing either. They became elemental in their violence. He paused, as if lost in memory. I remember that city, buried in snow at the edge of the world. The drifts rose 10 meters high, and its battlements were lined with flame weapons. When we brought up heavy guns to breach the defenses, the heat of the bombardment created torrents of meltwater. That filthy, gray flood seeped into our armor seals, stalled our tanks, and shorted our electrical relays. We were reduced to infantry engagements faster than expected. And still, the walls stood. Valdor's expression darkened. Ushotan made the first breakthrough. What followed was more slaughter than I would have countenanced. Not all of the Priest King's people were corrupted. Some were slaves, others might have been salvageable for productive roles in the Imperium. But the Thunder Warriors cared for none of that. They were like the weapons of the time, powerful but unstable. Once unleashed, they were impossible to control. They surged through the inner chambers like a tide, killing indiscriminately. He continued, his tone matter of fact. In their onslaught, they demonstrated the full power of gene-crafted soldiers. If we had sought proof of their prowess, we could not have asked for a clearer display. And yet, so many died on both sides. It felt wanton. Kandawire leaned forward. What did you do? Valdor's gaze hardened. I spoke to Ushotan after the citadel fell. By then, the roofs were broken, the walls pounded into rubble. We had fought for an entire day and night without pause. A fresh storm had buried the field in snow, covering the slush we had churned up. Ushotan's armor was drenched in freezing blood, his helm gone, his arm broken. He was laughing when I approached. There was a vivid light in his eyes. He looked like the ghost of all murders. What did he say? Kandawire asked, her voice steady. Valdor hesitated. He told me that he understood, for the first time, the reason he had been made. He told me I would never feel the same, and that he pitied me for it. And how did you respond? I was troubled, Valdor admitted, not by the insult, but by the sentiment. I felt as if we had unleashed something that would not be easily contained. What did that feeling lead to, Captain General? Valdor's expression tightened as he glanced at the recording device. The pause was deliberate, calculated. I think that is a discussion for another time. The recording abruptly ended. Kandawire leaned back, her mind racing. Was Valdor's calculated withdrawal a signal, an invitation, or a warning? The flickering light of the recording disc fades, but its revelations linger like whispers in the cold. The Thunder Warriors' ferocity, their uncontrollable violence, and Valdor's unease with what they had become. These are not just the echoes of a brutal campaign, but a prelude to something far greater. As Kandawire presses further into her investigation, the shadows around the Thunder Warriors grow darker. The massacre that ended their story looms closer, its truth buried beneath layers of secrecy and myth. What will be revealed when the veil is finally torn away? The answers await in Part 2, where we continue the journey through Kandawire's inquiry and Valdor's guarded testimony. The foundations of the Imperium may not be as unshakable as they seem. Stay tuned.